In the dusty back alleys of Cheshire, a girl was born into a simple blacksmith's family, destined to become one of the most scandalous figures of the 18th century. Emma Lyon, with not a penny to her name but possessing extraordinary beauty and sharp wit, quickly realized that men were her only chance to rise. She first became the mistress of a wealthy aristocrat, then, skillfully navigating between drawing rooms and bedrooms, managed to marry the British ambassador to Naples, Sir William Hamilton. Thus, the maid Emma Hart transformed into the dazzling Lady Hamilton, hostess of the most influential salon in Southern Europe. She didn't just charm, she manipulated kings and ministers, and her affair with Admiral Nelson became not merely an dalliance, but a political factor. However, when the men who secured her status passed away, her entire house of cards collapsed. Lady Hamilton, once steeped in luxury, ended her days in poverty, forgotten by all. For decades, we've been told a story of great love. But it wasn't love. It was a grand adventure, a brilliantly played game of life where every breath was a stake. To understand how a simple girl from the countryside could so masterfully orchestrate her destiny, we must delve into her origins, into the unglamorous reality that shaped her character. Emma Lyon was born in 1765 in the tiny village of Neston, Cheshire. Her father, John Lyon, a blacksmith, died before Emma was 2 years old. This early loss didn't just deprive the family of its breadwinner, it plunged mother and daughter into the abyss of desperate poverty. There was no inheritance, no connections, no education beyond the most basic. In those times, for a girl from the lower classes, there was only one path: marriage to another poor man, or heavy, grueling labor. And even that labor was the lot of few: maidservants, seamstresses, laundresses. Imagine a world where every day is a battle for a piece of bread, where hunger and cold are constant companions, and the future is not just hazy, it's non-existent. Emma's mother, Mary Kidd, was forced to take any job to survive. She became a chambermaid, and then Emma, barely reaching adolescence, followed suit. At 12, she was already working as a nanny. At 13, as a maid. These years left their mark. They forged in her not only remarkable endurance, but also a keen, cynical understanding of human nature. She saw how the wealthy lived in abundance, while the poor struggled for survival. She saw the power of money and titles, and her own lack thereof. It was then, in this ruthless school of life, that Emma learned the crucial lesson. Her beauty was not just a gift, but a tool, perhaps the only one, capable of pulling her out of the mire of poverty. This wasn't a sudden epiphany, but rather a slow, agonizing realization. By the age of 15, when she was already working in London, serving noble ladies, Emma Lyon, or Hart, as she then called herself, had definitively made her choice. She wasn't merely seeking comfort, she craved power, influence, and recognition, and she was prepared to use all available means to achieve it. This moment, when despair mingled with ambition, became the point of no return, after which there was no turning back. From then on, her life transformed into a calculated game, where every smile, every word, every gesture was part of a meticulously planned strategy. The powder keg of the 18th century was ready to explode. Europe, a continent perpetually at war or on its brink, teemed with shifting alliances and clashing empires. Britain, France, Spain, Austria, each vied for supremacy not only on battlefields but also in the glittering, treacherous ballrooms of diplomatic missions. Naples, a kingdom of breathtaking beauty and strategic importance, became a chessboard for these grand ambitions, a living, mutable hub where information was currency and personal influence could tip the scales of international relations. This wasn't merely a backdrop. It was the very air Emma breathed, a world where the lines between statesmanship and scandal blurred into a captivating, dangerous dance. Economically, the old feudal order, though clinging to power, groaned under the weight of burgeoning capitalism. New money, forged in the fires of early industrialization and burgeoning trade, began to challenge ancient lineage. Fortunes could be made and lost with dizzying speed, creating a volatile social ladder where merit, or cunning, sometimes outranked birth. This era saw the rise of a restless, ambitious class, not necessarily aristocratic, but wealthy enough to demand a seat at the table and hungry for the prestige that titles or an influential connection could provide. Socially, the era was characterized by paradoxical freedoms and rigid conventions. While public morality often dictated strict rules, especially for women, the private lives of the elite often comprised a labyrinth of intrigue, patronage, and calculated liaisons. Salons, those glittering intellectual and social hubs, offered witty and charming women an unprecedented, though unofficial, platform for power. Here, reputations were forged or broken, alliances whispered, and careers launched or destroyed by a timely word. Appearance was paramount, wit a weapon, and charm a universal key. For an ambitious woman like Emma, devoid of inherited status but brimming with charisma, this fluid, often amoral environment was not a barrier but an open invitation. It was a world where a carefully constructed image, a captivating presence, and a shrewd understanding of human desires could open doors forever closed to those bound by tradition or a lack of imagination. The stage was set, the actors restless, and the rules, for those who dared to bend them, were surprisingly flexible. By the age of 15, when Emma Lyon was already circulating in London circles, serving noble ladies, her unique tool was first applied with calculated effectiveness. Her first major project was Sir Harry Featherstone Hoff, a wealthy baronet known for his fondness for young, beautiful women. Emma didn't just become his mistress. She skillfully integrated herself into his life, charming him not only with her looks, but also with a lively wit that set her apart from ordinary courtesans. However, this step was not only an advancement for her but also a harsh lesson. When Emma became pregnant, the baronet quickly lost interest in her, leaving her to her own devices. It was a cruel reminder of how precarious her position could be if she didn't control the situation. She had to send her daughter away to be raised in the countryside to preserve any chance for her future. This episode didn't break her. It only solidified her conviction. Dependence on one man was too risky a strategy. The next stage of her ascent was Charles Greville, nephew of the influential Sir William Hamilton. Greville, an aesthete and collector, saw in Emma not just an attractive woman, but something akin to an uncut diamond. He rescued her from her dire situation, but it was a rescue with conditions. Greville took on her upkeep, but in return demanded complete submission and transformation. He began to systematically educate her, teaching her manners, music, drawing, instilling a taste for art and literature. This was not merely a love affair. It was a meticulously planned project to create an ideal companion capable of shining in high society. Emma, understanding this was her chance, absorbed new knowledge and skills with astonishing speed. She transformed from a simple girl into a refined lady, capable of maintaining any conversation and charming anyone. Greville, in turn, reveled in his creation, showcasing her in his salon like a rare work of art. But even this investment project had its expiry date. When Greville's financial difficulties became too burdensome and maintaining such an expensive toy became costly, he made his most cynical and perhaps most ingenious move. He offered Emma to his uncle, Sir William Hamilton, the British ambassador to Naples. Officially, this was presented as a trip to Italy for further education and an introduction to cultural heritage. In reality, it was a deal where Emma was an item of exchange. Greville got rid of an expensive mistress, and Sir William, an elderly but wealthy and influential diplomat, acquired a young, beautiful, and already partially trained companion. Emma, realizing the full humiliation of the situation, had no choice. She traveled to Naples, unaware of what awaited her there, but with a firm determination to use this last, desperate chance. This was not just a relocation, but a strategic repositioning, transforming her from an object of a transaction into a potential player on a completely new level of global diplomacy and intrigue. Upon arriving in Naples, Emma found herself in a situation that would have been a dead end for most. She was a gift, living merchandise passed from one man to another. But this 20-year-old woman, who had already endured the crucible of London's slums and aristocratic salons, possessed a rare, almost predatory instinct for survival and a phenomenal capacity for adaptation. Sir William Hamilton, who initially saw her only as a pleasant addition to his antique collection, quickly realized that he was dealing with something far more complex and captivating. Emma didn't just possess striking beauty. Her main tool was charisma, capable of literally mesmerizing her interlocutor. She didn't play a role. She became what the situation demanded, changing her manners, tone, even accent. For Sir William, tired of social conventions, she was a breath of fresh air. Emma, in turn, instantly understood his interests. He was an erudite, a collector, and connoisseur of beauty. She began not just to learn, but to absorb knowledge like a sponge. Learning Italian, art history, mythology, all this happened at dizzying speed. She didn't just repeat memorized phrases. She integrated new knowledge into her wit, into her conversations, making them lively and engaging. Emma masterfully employed a strategy of influence, turning Sir William himself into her chief expert and promoter. He began to showcase her not as a mistress, but as his creation, his Galatea, a source of pride. He taught her, and she learned so eagerly that it flattered his ego. He introduced her to the Neapolitan aristocracy, and there she began to create her own buzz. Her famous attitudes, living tableaux where she, using a shawl and minimal props, embodied mythological heroines or historical figures, became a true sensation. These were not mere performances. They were carefully choreographed demonstrations of her talent, plasticity, emotional range, and most importantly, her uniqueness. She didn't dance or sing in the traditional sense. She brought art to life, making audiences forget that they were watching a former maid. This was her way of asserting herself as a phenomenon, not a fleeting casual liaison. She understood that for a man of his age and position, like Sir William, not only physical comfort was important, but also intellectual stimulation, the opportunity to be a mentor, a patron. She gave him that, and more. She became his muse, his confidant, his living work of art. This play on his vanity, on his desire to shape and display perfection, proved to be a winning strategy. Soon, the relationship between them ceased to be merely a transaction. Sir William, a rational and pragmatic man, became genuinely captivated by Emma. She not only charmed him, but also became an indispensable part of his life, his home, his reputation. Her ability to adapt, to learn, and to turn her disadvantages into advantages allowed her not only to survive in Naples, but also to lay the foundation for an unprecedented ascent. She transformed her humiliating position into a springboard, using others' desires and her own talents to become the mistress of her own destiny. This strategic maneuver, which transformed her from an object into a player, culminated in 1791 when Sir William Hamilton, the British ambassador, asked for her hand in marriage. For high society, especially in London, this was not just a marriage, but an unprecedented scandal. A high-ranking diplomat, respected collector, and member of the Royal Society was marrying a former maid, a courtesan who had an illegitimate child. Accepted norms were flouted with such audacity that the very fact of this marriage was an act of open defiance. For Sir William, this was not an impulsive decision. Emma had become indispensable to him. She not only inspired him as a muse, but also managed his household, his social life, and his reputation with astonishing efficiency. In her, he found not just a companion, but a living, breathing center of attraction for Naples. Her attitudes drew the crème de la crème of European society, transforming his salon into a place where art, politics, and intrigue mixed into a single, intoxicating cocktail. She was his most valuable exhibit, his most successful project. And he, being a deeply pragmatic man, recognized her true value beyond simple infatuation. He married not a mistress, but a partner capable of enhancing his influence and prestige. For Emma, this marriage was a triumph, the culmination of years of desperate struggle. She gained not just a surname, but status, a title, and inviolability. Lady Hamilton. It sounded like a judgment against all who had ever doubted or scorned her. But this triumph came with a price. The British court, especially Queen Charlotte, King George III's consort, refused to receive her, pointedly rejecting the newly minted Lady Hamilton. This was not merely a personal insult. It was a direct challenge to her new status, an attempt to drag her back into the mire from which she had so desperately clawed her way out. The society she so yearned to conquer refused to forgive her past. It was at this moment that Emma displayed her true genius. Instead of crumbling under pressure, she transformed Naples into her personal fortress, and the Hamilton salon into an alternative center of power. If London refused to acknowledge her, Naples, with its liberal morals and thirst for entertainment, embraced her with open arms. She continued to refine her attitudes, turning them into a tool not only for entertainment, but also for demonstrating her sophistication and intellectual depth. Her charm, wit, and ability to converse on any topic made her an indispensable figure at the Neapolitan court, where she quickly won the favor of Queen Maria Carolina, sister of the French Queen Marie Antoinette. This friendship became her shield and sword, granting her access to the highest spheres of influence and the ability to weave international intrigues. The former maid, rejected by the British crown, became the hostess of the most influential salon in southern Europe, transforming personal humiliation into the foundation for political power. However, in the midst of this triumphant ascent, when it seemed that Emma Lyon, now Lady Hamilton, finally had complete control over her destiny, a man entered the scene who would prove to be her last and most fatal mistake. It was 1798. The Napoleonic Wars were tearing Europe apart, and Naples, a strategically located port, became a key point in the grand game. It was then that the flagship of the British fleet entered the harbor, and Admiral Horatio Nelson stepped ashore, already a legend, a man who had lost an eye and an arm in battle, but had not lost his iron will and charisma. He arrived in Naples to resupply and secure the support of the royal family. Lady Hamilton, as the salon hostess and close friend of Queen Maria Carolina, was the first to receive the hero. And at this moment, the calculating adventuress who had built her life on cold logic and strategic maneuvering made an irreparable mistake. She fell in love. This was not just an affair, but an all-consuming passion that overshadowed all her previous lessons and principles. Nelson, a heroic but deeply lonely man, found in Emma not only a lover, but a kindred spirit who understood his ambitions and sacrifices. Their liaison quickly ceased to be a secret, turning into an open, scandalous affair for high society, casting a shadow not only on Lady Hamilton's reputation, but also on Sir William's diplomatic standing. Emma, once a master manipulator of men, now found herself at the mercy of her own emotions. Her famous attitudes became less frequent. Her attention to Sir William, who still adored her despite everything, waned. She, who had so meticulously crafted her image as a refined lady, now appeared more and more often by Nelson's side, displaying her affection without a hint of restraint. In the eyes of the British court, which had never accepted her, she definitively transformed from an upstart to a fallen woman. This was not just a personal failure. It was a public exposure of her carefully concealed past, which was now associated with the Admiral, a national hero. The culmination of this mad romance was the birth of their daughter, Horatia, in 1801. This illegitimate child, bearing her father's name, became living proof of their connection, finally shattering any illusion of propriety. For Emma, who had once given up her first daughter to preserve a chance at a future, this act was either the highest form of love or a complete abandonment of her former rules of the game. She could no longer control the narrative. Her life became public property, a subject of gossip and ridicule. The return to England with Nelson and the aging Sir William, who, despite everything, remained devoted to her, marked the beginning of the end. Society, which had once watched her ascent with curiosity, now awaited her downfall with undisguised schadenfreude. Emma, who had so long been the puppet master, became a puppet in the hands of her own passion. The return to England proved not to be a triumph, but the beginning of a public execution. British high society, which had already barely tolerated her origins, now had irrefutable proof of her fall. The doors of aristocratic salons, which had swung open for her in Naples, slammed shut in London with ostentatious disdain. Queen Charlotte, who had never accepted Lady Hamilton, now openly boycotted her, turning personal disapproval into official court policy. This did not merely deprive Emma of social recognition. It cut off the oxygen to her influence, which depended on connections and displays of status. For Sir William Hamilton, whose health was rapidly deteriorating, this scandal became the final nail in the coffin of his brilliant diplomatic career. His influence, built over decades on an impeccable reputation and subtle maneuvering, was now irrevocably undermined. The Crown, unwilling to be associated with such disgrace, distanced itself from the once respected ambassador, unequivocally demonstrating its disapproval. The financial streams that fueled his lavish lifestyle and extensive collections began to dry up. What had once seemed an inexhaustible source of wealth, his lands, investments in colonial ventures, and even his famous art collections, now melted away under the weight of mounting debts. His ore, if you will, his capital and reputation, were irrevocably devalued by the scandal. Emma, accustomed to unlimited luxury and unable to live frugally, continued to spend money at the same lavish pace, exacerbating an already catastrophic situation. She did not cut expenses. On the contrary, she tried to maintain the illusion of prosperity by hosting lavish receptions, which were now attended only by those seeking gossip or prepared to profit from her downfall. Creditors, once willing to wait, now demanded their money. Investors, those who had invested in her social capital, counting on prestige and connections, now found themselves with nothing. Their calculations for advantageous acquaintances or political dividends associated with her name had collapsed. In 1803, Sir William Hamilton died, leaving Emma with only a small pension and a mountain of debt. He bequeathed her a few valuable artworks, but most of his assets were either sold to pay off creditors or inherited by his nephew, Charles Greville, who, however, was not eager to help his former mistress. Nelson, who had recently been her hero and the meaning of her life, now found himself in a difficult position. He was married, and his position in the British Navy, though heroic, did not allow him to openly support Lady Hamilton and their illegitimate daughter. Sir William's death was a turning point. Emma, deprived of her main patron and shield, found herself alone with reality. Her title, once a symbol of triumph, now served only as a reminder of lost status. Without Hamilton's support, and with constantly growing debts, her once impregnable fortress began to crumble. The Crown, through the Foreign Office, took no steps to alleviate her plight or acknowledge her contributions to the diplomatic efforts in Naples, which she had, in essence, led under Sir William's wing. On the contrary, her name became synonymous with scandal and extravagance, a vivid example of what happens to those who dare to break the unwritten rules of high society. Her once brilliant image crumbled before her eyes, exposing the fragility of her position, built entirely on male patronage. Her once brilliant image crumbled before her eyes, exposing the fragility of her position, built entirely on male patronage. The paradox is that precisely at this moment, when Lady Hamilton was defeated, her story began to be distorted. Admiral Nelson's legendary fame, his status as a national savior, proved so powerful that it could absorb and even romanticize the most outrageous scandal. Their liaison, once disgraceful, transformed into a great love, where her role was reduced to a beautiful muse, not a calculating adventuress whose actions had real political consequences. The story we were fed for decades was carefully filtered, cleansed of the inconvenient details of her origins, her ruthless ambition, her manipulations. Ultimately, Emma Lyon, a phenomenon of her time, was relegated to a supporting figure in the saga of a hero whose glory demanded a clean, unsullied image. Her true cynical genius was buried under a romantic veneer, convenient for the Admiral's posthumous reputation. The universal lesson of this story is simple and harsh. Even the most brilliant individuals can be rewritten to suit others' legends, and truth often loses to the power of a well-told myth. And precisely when her real life lay in ruins, another story began, the one that would be told to posterity. Society, unwilling to acknowledge the incredible will and calculating genius of a simple maidservant, chose to immortalize only the romanticized version of her affair with Admiral Nelson. Her name, instead of being a symbol of daring play and unprecedented social breakthrough, became forever inscribed in the shadow of his heroic myth. The paradox of her legacy is that this woman, who masterfully controlled her destiny and manipulated the most influential figures of her era, was reduced to the role of a passive companion to another's glory, the tragic lover of a great man. Her life strategy, built on cold calculation and incredible audacity, was rewritten as a banal love story, where her sharp mind and composure vanished behind the brilliance of another's triumph. This is not just an injustice. It is a universal lesson about how easily historical narratives are distorted to fit convenient stereotypes. Emma Lyon's story is not about love, but about a ruthless struggle for survival, the price of ambition, and how society prefers myth to reality when the truth is too inconvenient.